What is up? I'm your host, Dr. Socks.
And I'm Dr. Jaron Jones, and welcome to another episode of the Quarantine Snacks Podcast, aka the QSP.
Where you come for the healthy snacks, but you leave with some soul food. What's happening, Jay?
A lot, but we're making it, and we're gonna talk about it.
Yeah, so today on QSP, man, this feels like one of those, I don't have good words for it, but this is an urgent episode. It's an important episode. It's an important time in America. And so today we're going to talk about simply one word today, black. I put together my black shades, eyeglasses, frameless, you feel me? Got on my T'Challa shirt, like you said. Today's whatever. Since my boy won't do it, since Chadwick won't do it anymore, I got you. But yeah, man, I totally, being black, just black, as if that won't enough. So today we're gonna chat a little bit about that. How's that sound?
I like it, man. I like it. I think it's needed for us as friends, as you as a mental health expert, me in leadership, and both of us as D&I practitioners. Outside of that, black men, black partners in relationships, black sons, black friends, whether it's one of your many black friends or your only black friend. These are conversations that you all might not be privy to because you might not be on the other side of these conversations where you sit. So this is something for our people, but also for those who are looking to be allies. And we're hoping that you might be able to get something from it. But truthfully, I believe our genuine focus is checking on each other, our mental health, how to help other people process through this the best way possible, provide some understanding through that conversation. And we think everybody will benefit from it. So that's kind of the urgency of now,
Yeah, absolutely. So, and just in case, you happen to be listening to us someday that's after May 29th, 2020, we've got some horrible news, most recently in the news, about what it's like to be black. We recently heard about George Floyd. Before that, Breonna Taylor. We have a trans young man whose name escapes me, Jay, down in Florida. I got to make sure to get it. I think it was Jacksonville. And I want to make sure that what we're doing is making space for these people who were killed, especially by police officers. So today, I want to make sure, and like you said earlier, I want to make sure that what we do is we just start to record these conversations, right? I think a lot of gems come through us just bouncing ideas around. And I'm hoping that today that these snacks, like we said in our tagline, that some of these snacks will land in folks' souls. That's really the MO today. So, I think this episode started with like this group chat, man. This group chat that we got going. You, me, a couple other guys that we rolled with in Gainesville before we all kind of split up and started going different directions. We just started checking on each other, man. Like today, I don't know who it was. If it was you or somebody else in the chat that just said, "Fellas, how y'all doing?" Man, and that started something. That really started something.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Absolutely, man. Because the thing is, we've all been trying to figure out how to navigate, this, especially this past week, but really months, really our whole life. But it feels like as an African American, we go through waves. I don't know if you've noticed this too, but it feels like it's not one instance. It's compounded by several instances where either blatant racism is involved or conscious, unconscious bias, prejudice that has turned deadly for us, where it's just so many emotions and feelings. You don't even have time to process one death because there's another next, or there's another death. We have 3 deaths, and we also have instance of bird watching in Central Park and using your blackness to weaponize the urgency for police to come. as a threat. So, like, at some point, it's you have to protect your mental health. You have to protect yourself, and it just seems like it's more of the same.
Man,
And we're seeing
man.
what happens when unheard hurt decides to say, hey, it seems like the peaceful protest, it seems like the kneeling doesn't help, doesn't is unheard, nothing changes. And it shouldn't take rioting, it shouldn't take protesting
Man.
to have people recognize our pain, but more importantly, with that pain, we don't want you to just say, "Hey, we see it." We want change. We want progress. Um, I was trying to think of something to do with my time. I was like, I gotta figure out a way to be creative. I gotta figure out a way to do something. The Facebook posts are great, but how am I staying who I am in my sanctity of how I take up space for myself? And it was just like, I draw. I haven't drawn anything in a while, but I'm watching, I go back and look and listen and be like, what did our leaders do in this time period? And I'm watching videos of Dr. King during the civil rights movement, during the marches,
Yeah.
during some of the riots that happened during that time. And I was watching a clip and it's resurfaced and it talks about, riots are the voice of the voiceless or the unheard, right? But the
Mm-hmm.
last part of that clip for me, I just had to just draw it because it kind of instilled into my head. And it says, social justice and progress are the guarantors of riot prevention. And
Wow.
part of my mental health,
Wow.
this is my adult coloring.
Oh, wow.
you know,
Wow, brother.
but I said it says social justice and progress are the
Mm.
guarantors of riot prevention. So
Mm.
these
Mm.
are actions to uh, a lack of justice,
Yeah.
lack of progress. And
Mm.
I'm looking at these videos and they're still relative today. We're not seeing it as blatant as often, but then at the same time, is it that maybe it hasn't gotten as better as we think it is, but it's just now being recorded more. I don't
Yeah.
know.
Yeah,
It's
man.
been a lot, man. It's been a lot, and I've been trying to process hurt, anger, fear, determination,
Mm.
um, hope, but probably more frustration and anger than anything else. And so I'm hoping that we can talk that out because I think other people are feeling the same way. And
Yeah.
I'm not so sure if there's much hope on their side, understanding how to process that for activism, for the change that you want to see, and also making sure that we aren't becoming the evil that we protest against. And that's hard because honestly, every very strong leader that we had that showed us the process of how to organize and how to push through has been assassinated historically. And so we are still those protesters and descendants of those protesters without that same level of leadership. And I think that we have to understand how the strategy, how to look at everything and put pieces together to figure out what do we want, how do we want it, how do we go about getting it, and making sure we're sane in that process.
Wow. Wow. I think you just wrote a book, bro. Um, that's wild. Um, I really, gosh, man, I don't think I could connect more with a sentiment right now. You and I spoke briefly about kind of anger. You know, there's some research. A previous advisor, my supervisor, Anthony Green, uh, he had talked about when I was under his supervision back in probably 2014, 2013, that like the one thing that what emotion that Black men were allowed to express was anger. Um, and there's a whole world of research out there about masculinity, anger, and how anger, I teach some anger management classes. And part of that process is understanding that anger is often what we call a secondary emotion. Um, it's usually fueled by something else, right? Something under the anger. So, you get in the house and, your partner doesn't make you feel happy, well, you express some anger. But what might be actually happening is under that anger is some hurt, right? Something that might be a little more vulnerable. And the anger, the ways that we express that anger, right? The riots that you've seen, burning down of AutoZone, burning down of Target, the looting, all the things that are happening all over, not just Minnesota, Minneapolis, right, but all over the place. what we've seen is this is a response to hurt, right? To a systemic hurt, systemic oppression. Um, it feels in some ways much like when we respond from a place of anger when someone's been pissing us off little bit by little bit for a long time. This feels exactly like that, but if you put, instead of like a long time, you add, I don't know, 400 years, generation after generation after generation of these microaggressions, right? Your work in DEI are similar, but these like micro insults, these micro cuts. I think the authors were, I think it was Sue and Sue, if I remember correctly, we talked about microaggressions. And this idea that they're taking, it's like these micro cuts, like death by 1,000 cuts. And I'm thinking like Black folks, man, we're tired of bleeding out. Tired of feeling the same sentiment and nothing is changing. And that all it takes, the only difference to that quote that Will Smith at least posted on his IG, I don't know if he fathered it, but this idea that racism isn't happening more frequently now. People are just recording it. So the young man, I think it was Tony I don't know if it's this dude's name. That's why I pulled it up on my phone. Just the young trans man, Tony McDade, who was killed recently by the police officer. Nobody caught it on camera. So as a result, what happens? Well, his story goes unheard.
About it, right? Yeah. In all honesty, I hadn't heard about it, so I'm thanking you for bringing that to light. And honestly, I've been so caught up in the ones that have been videotaped and following the folks who are telling us to make the phone calls and send the emails and things like that. I didn't even know about that. So
so what happened in brief, man? Yesterday morning, Tony McDade is a young man who identifies as a trans male, and what happened was he was killed, I believe, by police officers in Jacksonville and Tallahassee. So our Tallahassee Police Department. Black trans male, prior to being shot and fatally wounded by a police officer, he posted a video to his Facebook page recounting a horrific beating he received from 5 men because he's a Black trans man. After the cops showed up, he ended up being shot by a police officer. And the reason this matters so much, right, is because the LGBTQ SQL population, there's much more mental health issues there than there are in the general population, in the hetero and or cisgender populations. There's much more, not just mental health, right, but the stigma around seeking mental health, let's say for Black people, persists even more so in those populations, right? I'm working on a paper, you and I talked about that briefly, where I'm having to review not just the barriers to Black men seeking mental health services, which are things like the cool pose, which we can talk about another time, maybe. Black women, some of the barriers to them, which are some of these phenomena like IBW, the Invincible Black Woman Syndrome, as well as the it's called like super Black woman schema, something like that. But the concept is that trans folks, they don't get as much research dollars and things like that, so that their stories go untold, unheard, their experiences go unrecognized. So it's important that we also pay attention to that experience in Tallahassee, because what's happening in the front with Floyd is like, wow, we got a video, and because we have a video, it's being in some ways sensationalized to the point that Donald Trump is making comments about his life, which for better or worse means that it's got somebody's attention.
Yeah, absolutely, man. And hearing about Tony McDade, I mean, you think about this happening right on the eve of Pride Month, and so like, people are already trying to figure out how they can just show up and take up space and live authentically them. It's another layer to that onion we keep talking about of just identity in culture and society, and where you feel comfortable, where you feel safe. And it's just there's just so many instances where things should be better, should have been better, and if it goes unheard, these things continue to happen and nothing changes. I don't know. It's usually I'm a very positive, peppy, I sit in my emotions and my feelings, and I process the emotions. I think about other people and their lived experience and how they see the same thing differently, and I can't fault them. But to what extent do you lose your identity in trying to not acknowledge the hurt and pain and fear that you can feel? I mean, um, people like you and I, and like countless other Americans and just human beings, the intent or the thought that if I do things the right way, if I am considerate of others, if I, you know, am a model citizen,
Yeah.
what's that defined is based upon the majority of that democracy. And we'll talk about that too. Um, how you take up space. But the idea that if I do things the right way, my life is guaranteed, at least to a higher percentage, to be long and not cut short. Um,
Yes.
but also the idea that I can't defend or
Mm,
question, or I have to go limp
mm,
to
mm,
survive.
mm.
And when I've been in situations where, the goal is make the officer feel comfortable and just get home.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Fix you get home. Because if you don't get home, what does it matter? They're probably not gonna get convicted anyway. You know what I'm saying? So
Yeah.
it's that fear. People don't understand. Some people do, but I don't think people understand the constant pressure is as a Black person in America most of the time. We usually peel off
Oh
the
man.
assimilation, the having to make people feel comfortable, the W.B. Du Bois calls it the duality of being African American. It's understanding you're
Right.
African American and an American, right?
Yeah.
And your percentage to thrive is your ability to understand both and navigate those back and forth, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
You feel like you're often in spaces where I know I'm African American. I know the fear that society puts with me being an African American. So as I navigate, when I go run, I got triggered this week because I needed a mental health break and I want to go run. And then I thought about a mod and I got triggered again. So I can't run in my neighborhood because
Right.
where are the safe spaces? And so then it's like, uh, part of me is happy to be quarantined. And another part is upset that I have to feel that the only place of true authentic comfort is in my own home.
Mm,
Then I think about Brianna, and you can be asleep
mm.
in your own
Man.
home,
Man.
no convictions be had. And so the justice part, the lack of justice, it just breeds and feeds more feelings of
Mm.
hopelessness at times,
Yeah.
uh, fear and anger. But you still have hope. We're still a people of hope and resilience.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
People,
Jay,
yeah, sorry, go ahead.
man, no, you brought up something, man, that really resonates with me, man, about like going limp, and like I remember watching that video about with that, with the father's teaching his son if a cop has his knee on the back of your neck, and how he told his son to go limp, like allow your body to really relax. That way you can breathe slow, and that idea of like going limp to survive. I mean, what a powerful image, um, for living, in this world as a Black person.
And you think,
Um,
and then to tug at that, where it gets even more frustrating. George went limp for 2.5 minutes,
mm,
and that didn't help him.
mm,
He was
yeah,
that like that. The officers were on him for over 8 minutes. So whether this autopsy shows that it wasn't due to asphyxiation and it was uh, uh, prior health conditions
mm-hmm.
compounded, it was compounded by the pressure of force for over 8 minutes that led to those
Yeah, of course.
his death. But we're not trying to justify. For one, we're not satisfied with one officer being arrested. There were multiple who sat there as people were saying he's not conscious. Can you
Yeah,
check both? The lack of empathy for those who are supposed to protect and serve is where the injustice is. Because when we see that video, as a person of color, I see it for one, I see an image of my uncle, my
mm-hmm.
cousins, myself. And so I'm looking at a piece of myself and I'm looking with an empathetic eye to say, hey, I can't breathe. not an excuse like we heard, don't do drugs. That was the cops' excuse. So I'm looking at it I'm looking at this video through empathy. I'm looking at him say he can't breathe. I'm looking at him calling out to his mom. I'm looking at him call out to his family. And he knows he's in his last breath. He says, before I transition from this earth, I want y'all to hear me, at least tell you I love you. Like, so for people to be so meticulous about the video, and if this police officer was the one person who killed this man, does he get 3rd-degree murder, 1st-degree murder? George don't come back from that. Yeah. And I'm looking at that video for that. I'm looking at the video like, how did it take a riot and a Target getting burnt down and things being destroyed for just a conviction from one person? I don't know if people are, this is an assumption. I'm assuming that people who see that video and see something totally different from their lived experience or lack of knowledge are not seeing themselves in George, but seeing themselves in the officers. They're looking at the video, empathizing with the person whose knee is on his neck. They're empathizing and saying, did he resist? Well, I think his finger twitched. Well, we didn't see the video beforehand. It doesn't matter, because a loss of life does not justify writing a bad check, even if he did. Like, it doesn't justify the supposed crime. We are all supposed to have due process of anything. Life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, due process, innocent until proven guilty. You can't be you can't be all of those things and executioner. And people are gonna be upset as a people. And it's just happened over and over and over. At some point, you just feel like, hey, this ain't up to us to fix this no more.
Right.
Because we've been doing this since we've been in shackles, since we've been here. So it's up to y'all, allies, non-people of color, to start looking at yourself and doing your own research. You see these books behind me? These are history books. This is about social justice. Let me tell you what I gotta do. I gotta read this book. When I was in college, being a black man, I had to learn how to be a black man. I didn't have any father figures. I had uncles. I had a grandfather who was great. I didn't have a dad that was in my house like that, right? But that wasn't an excuse. But to survive, I did my research. Let me pull from other stories. I got Cornel West, Race Matters, because if I'm gonna talk to democracy and talk about how to bring people together, I gotta research that. Let's look at W.B. Du Bois, The Narrative of Frederick Douglass. Let's look at Stamped from the Beginning by Ibram Kendi. You're like, how to be an anti-racist. We are doing our own research to try and train other people that are non-people of color to see us as human beings and equal.
TJ, this is where you go wrong. This is one place where you go wrong. Is that the premise there is that we're people. And that's the problem. Right? And I know we talked about this for a second, but it's like, remember I talked about that dog, right? If one day dogs got the same rights as people, someday people would look at these dogs and go, whoa, what you doing in this house? Like, ain't you supposed to be back there in the cage? Oh, you not only do you want to eat food, you want to eat food at the table with me? Like, oh, that's okay. That's what, oh, you want to eat, not only eat food with me, you want to go in line ahead of me. What? It's not gonna happen. It's not gonna happen. And the reason, and we can, and the point there is that, like, for white people, especially white males, those white males who, for 400 some odd years ago, played a role in starting transatlantic slave trade, is this concept that we went to go get, to your point, not people, right? We went to go get, like you said, putting a label on them. We went to go get slaves. We went to go get cattle. We went to go get something that would work for us to make us money. The same thing that we do with horses and cows is the same thing we're planning to do with these dark-skinned Negroes, whatever we want to call them. And now we are the descendants of those Negroes, right? And we're saying, wait a minute, we're not slaves. We're people that were enslaved. Right?
Yeah, we were enslaved people, never property.
Never property.
And we never thought we were property. we might have code switched again. Still do today, where my Jordans and LeBrons and all of my African garb and everything that I hold culturally dear stays here. But when I'm at work, I got to show up to make sure everybody there knows that they feel comfortable. Man. I'm not combative. I'm not intimidating something. And I
Yeah.
should be intimidating because I'm very intelligent because I put in the work.
Right. And think about being, and I know you see this in your work too, man. My homeboy texted me about this. He said, I can't imagine what it's like to be a black therapist right now.
Yeah, man.
Right? To try to hold space for people who are hurting, who look like the people that killed George Floyd.
Mm.
Um, to to help white women through their depression and through their anxiety, through their traumas, knowing that a white woman called, on this man in Central Park, trying to get him to look like George Floyd when it was all said and done, no matter what um, actually happened. Like how difficult it is to hold an emotional space while feeling traumatized.
Yeah.
It is, and the only way, one of the only ways, maybe the most effective way, I should say, to do that has been um, you, that group chat between you, me, and the fellas. Guys are checking on each other. Appreciate that. Um, my homegirl sent me like how to grieve through racial trauma, and I thought, okay, this is really dope. This is helpful. I want to share that in a moment, man. And the other thing that's been extremely helpful is the times that I hit my timeline, I have seen, and for some reason, I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's the man's name or what. I have seen a crazy amount of allyship, more than I've seen in the past.
Yeah.
Like I didn't see this for Trayvon.
No.
I didn't see none of this stuff, man, for the other young men that have died since, right? What I saw was a lot of silence, and that silence has been deafening. But this time, I'm seeing people come out of the woodworks, and I don't get it, but all I know is that allyship is the catalyst for change.
Yes.
Um,
And change for not just social justice for us, but also for any feelings of guilt or thoughts of fragility. Allyship is the action item that helps this sickness of racism be eradicated. You see what I'm saying? So it's the silence, it might be silence to us and it can be deafening, but it's loud in many people's ears who aren't black or brown, but white people. Like I have a really good core of friends that help me to keep that hope that it's not a fight that can ever be won or be or have progress and progression, And so like they want to know, how do I deal with white guilt? How do I deal with uh, feeling like I want to help and I'm fearful of saying and doing the wrong thing, And so that helps me. Like you were saying, that helps me. Allyship, it's a prescription, Now it comes in different doses for what your need is, for your level. But but it helps us and it helps y'all. So we need y'all to do your research. Part of being I'm glad this is probably a perfect segue. Before we get to that segue in allyship, I just want to say thank you as a mental health professional, bro. We talk as brothers, as friends. When we don't talk, I know we're both going through some internal thought where we have to have our distance. So when we connect, we know how to communicate with one another. But I know that I can't imagine the pressure that you're going through in the work that you do. I'm seeing it from a D&I perspective, but you're dealing with people's thoughts, emotions, feelings virtually. So there's so many layers that you go through, and I just want to commend you for the work that you're doing. And I mean, it's a Friday, and this is what we spend our Fridays doing is even after we may have poured a lot out of our cup, this is how we pour back into each other. Pouring in your cup too with thank yous and giving you your flowers while you are here and need them. So I just wanted to say that. I appreciate you. I love you, bro. And thank you for being the spirit that you are.
Man, I really appreciate that, brother. There's nothing that keeps my cup full in that, you know what I mean? And just because I work in mental health, it doesn't mean that I'm the only person holding space, right? This is one reason why I think you and I even started talking about this podcast, because our personal interests somehow bled into our professional vocations.
Right.
And, although my job is to create space hour after hour after hour, if you can't create space, you can't do your job. So the amount of passion and the amount of like kind of genuine care that you bring to what you do is invaluable as well. So I'm really grateful for you. I love you too. Um, you know, allyship. Yeah, you were saying a word on allyship, man.
Yeah, man. The research is out there for those who are looking to be good allies. I think the best research is research that has been done in conjunction with people of color and non-people of color, and the non-people of color have delivered it for their you know the other non-people of color as well. I think there's a language, there's an understanding. Like I wouldn't expect a white person to speak to the Black experience the same way I can't speak to allyship as a Black person that's not white. You know what I'm saying? Like there's a shared understanding there.
Yeah, that makes sense. Oh yeah.
So there's some good work, that a good resource. I'll see if I can find some links to put out there for your, for those who are seeking, for those who have been in your space of not knowing how to go through, and they've gone through the process and they've seen things get better and them help in, against systemic oppression and how to show up for their friends, and how to allow their friends to take up space and express what their needs are, to not speak for them. So I think that's great. But there is also a space to form some understanding of our experience. Again, I talked about just two books by Ibram Kendi, bro. The one that Ibram was a professor at the University of Florida while we were there. So when the Trayvon Martin situation happened, the Black Student Union, the Black Graduate Student Organization, met at the Institute of Black Culture. And we had a panel discussion that included Ibram and the police chief. And we didn't know what to do. We're a satellite campus. So everybody comes from all over the country to go to school for 3 to 4 years, and then we leave. So it's a bunch of people from all walks of life, all different experiences, people of color trying to figure out what do we do. And there were brown folks and white folks there too. It was great. And Ibram had just wrote the book. We didn't know who he was. He was like, listen, I need y'all to understand. Y'all should read my book. Stamped from the beginning. This book is the definitive history of racist ideas in America. So we talk about language. Like he talked about how when they called us slaves instead of enslaved people. Like these ideologies, these thoughts and opinions, they all have historical context. The language, the words that we use, I mean, the concept of thugs versus very nice people, all this has historical context and bearings and undertones that can be. And so this book helps break down some of the historical context. For those, he then put out another book. First off, he was the youngest, one of the youngest people to receive the National Book Award. He now works in DC doing anti-racist work. And his next book is How to Be an Anti-Racist.
Man.
This book, he says, the only way to undo racism is to consistently identify and describe it and then dismantle it. So for those who are looking to be allies, to have some understanding from people of color, those are two options, both from Ibram. He's amazing, great guy. Look him up on YouTube. A lot of the stuff that he talks about is free information. So just throwing out, because again, I said these conversations, we want them to be for everybody.
Absolutely, man.
And these books that I pulled a lot from too, bro. So
yeah, I wanted to pull up, man, as well. So you hit a really amazing side, which is like, what do we do for our allies? And I noticed today I made a post on my my IG page, my Dr. Socks page, and by the way, it's at dr.sockology, dr.sockology on Instagram. So check me out there. And you are at I Live Mighty. Is that right, Jay?
That's right.
Cool, man. So, I remember I saw a post about not needing to be Black to feel outraged. And so I posted this picture, but what kept coming to me for the caption was, yeah, it's a nice picture, and the picture's about allyship, and I care. I personally have quite a heart for allies and allyship. But I also care a whole lot about the Black folks who are struggling with the trauma themselves, who might not know what to do with it, to do with the trauma, the experience of being traumatized over and over and over again. So I went to my page, and under that, in the comment section, I just basically asked, for the folks of color, if you got any concerns, you got anything going on, let me know in the comments. That way we'll be able to provide some support. But I had a friend who sent me a post, grieving from racial trauma, and it talked about how grieving the loss of Black folks who were murdered at the hands of whiteness is painful, it's traumatic, exhausting, and confusing. To your point, a lot of those same folks, you and myself included, have to then show up, at our job. There's no day off for racism. Otherwise, I had every day off, right? So some of the tips that were given, I really appreciated this. Was grieving from racial trauma can look like things like releasing, giving yourself permission to take breaks from social media and the like. Check in with your loved ones, right? Creating a strong social support system. Really appreciated that. Prioritize your self-care. I, as a Black person, really struggle with that. The line, because as a kid, I was raised in a Black church, and I wasn't raised to consider what I need. A lot of the things that were happening in my life when I was growing up was about how to make other people feel comfortable. And the idea that the type of Christianity that I remember, at least growing up, was one that was centered around selflessness, which is amazing, and I think is the cornerstone of the religion, selflessness and love. But I didn't learn, as a result, a lot about boundaries and caring for me. And I think that throughout my journey as a therapist and just as an adult, started to consider, like, what in the world does Dennis need? And that, I think, has positively impacted my relationship with self and others. Talking out, again, speaking to a therapist or someone who does some type of work in the community around, how are you doing, right? So there's some research. The reason I say it that way is because there's some research that has surfaced about the impact of the church and informal mental health services in the Black community. And so we may have to change our language on what we describe as seeking mental health help. Right now we look at mental health help as, coming to see someone like myself, right? Seeing a professional. There are lots of barriers for Black folks to come see me as a therapist in that role that I play. But I remember, growing up, being in the barbershop and having some conversations that mattered, going to church, having some conversations that mattered, having some homeboys, like you mentioned. I didn't have my dad in the house either. So trying to find somebody to talk to about stuff that was difficult. So finding ways to both informal mental health services as well as some formal services, because I went to school for a long time because there's some things that are imperative to mental health that might not be able to be figured out in an informal setting. And then finally, to get empowered, to find some ways to feel like you can do something. This comes back for me as a therapist, especially with the substance use work I used to do. The serenity prayer was an imperative. Like, it was, a germane part of my work. And what I've learned is that serenity prayer, basically around finding ways to figure out what you can control, that prayer permeates every part of my job. It could be a conversation with a friend who's calling me because they don't know what to do with this Black stuff. It could be a patient that's struggling with some chronic pain, man. It could be myself when it comes to, like, having a partner who might want me to hang with her instead of work on this paper at 12 o'clock midnight. Like trying to figure out what can I control versus the things that are out of my hands. And I think as people of color, we're looking to your point about the language, as people of color, it's really, really hard to stand by and watch us get treated like cattle in 2020.
Yeah, man. When we talk, I've been trying to process just how we got here, and just to this point, not like how we got here, like, but from the perspective of how do we get to having to say people of color, non-people, white people, like,
right.
At the end of the day, as a diversity and inclusion practitioner, speaker, leadership person, all about inclusion and equity, my only goal, though it may not be realistic, because I feel like, humans will always find a way to discriminate and segregate and be prejudiced in certain aspects. But the engine inside, I tell myself, is work harder and work yourself out of a job. Well, your job as a D&I role in a corporation is no longer needed because it's ingrained in the fabric. And so what does that look like? We're not looked at as cattle, as people of color, as property, as thugs. We're looked at as human beings. But the problem with the system of oppression and oppressive systems is that you have to go back every year, decade, generation, thousands of years, and talk about where those seeds were planted to get back to a space where we are just humans. So what we're trying to do is unravel the conditioning of segregation and prejudice of each other. In this case, we're usually the oppressed right now as a minority population right now. And it's all about, hey, this is what you said is racist. You might not understand this racist. Here's the history behind it. You see what I'm saying? So, man. When you hear people say, I don't see color, I need you to see color right now. Once we are all humans and treated equitably as humans, then I can deal with it. But in this moment, given the systems, the seeds that were planted since we arrived here, things that we are still seeing are the residuals of undiscussed conversations, unhad breaking down of systems that still allow Blackness to be a threat, that still allows my Blackness to be received as a complaint versus an expression of pain. We see it in health, in healthcare. Our Black mothers are exponentially at more of a disadvantage of surviving pregnancy because, like we were talking about, several doctors don't, the indestructible Black woman, does not exist. They're not really in pain. George Floyd, he's on the ground. He wasn't really in pain. Alton Sterling, suffocated. He can't breathe. He wasn't really in pain. Like things where if you can get back to human rights, you have empathy for it. But we have to dismantle and discuss systems. And these systems aren't the systems that we built. So we need people to take part of the dismantling of systemic oppression.
Wow, Jay, that's good, man. Man, what you make, man, that is really good because there's a part of this that is like, let's say, for instance, the white officer's belief that the Black man can handle more pain than any other human, right? So there's this real disconnect between like being 3/5 of a person and then being superhuman. There's the Black woman who is put at the bottom of the totem pole when it comes to pay, other resources in the workplace. So they are nothing. But at the other end of the spectrum, the Black woman feels like she can't go seek therapy, for example, because she has to be perceived as an invincible Black woman. She's got to be a strong Black woman, right? So there's this real interesting chasm. And within that chasm, right, is humanity, right? Personhood is the ability to be fallible, the ability to have struggle. In fact, the same thing I'm talking about is the reason why we can't go see therapists, right? Because on one end, hey, I got problems, I got issues. I'm not even a person, but I either got to be nobody or I got to be able to handle everything. And I can't just have a bad day, right? Even on my job, I can't feel traumatized because other Black people were killed this week.
Yeah. I can't take a mental health day, even though of all the weeks to take mental health days, this was the week. I mean,
bro, I'm a whole psychologist, and I can't take a mental health day.
If there was a day, these were the days. Man, but you're spot on, bro. It's this dichotomy of like, how do I take up space as a human being? And then we talked about it in a few of our other podcasts. We've been conditioned. You gotta be twice as good to be just the standard. That conditioning says we're supposed to experience twice as much trauma as well. That's not the case. We're not. What we're supposed to be focusing on is that we shouldn't have to work twice as hard to get the same equitable resources that everybody else has. But we say things like, oh, I was killed because I was Black. Back to the language. You were not killed. He was not killed because he was Black. He was killed due to the ills and the disease called racism, prejudice, bias, and unconscious bias. And so what we have to understand is it's not because I'm Black. It's not because you're Black. It's not because it's the system. It's because we're not having the conversations of what we need to do to dismantle these systems that get to progress for both sides.
That's good. That's good. And not only talking to the white folks, right? Exactly. Not just talking to the white folks about this, but like we perpetuate that same system, right? If I feel like I got to be Superman, and I can't be fallible, then I'm giving myself the same message they giving me. you got to be super. You got to be better than my dad. Well, the guy I call my dad, love him to death. My biological dad, I ain't have a dad in the house. My homeboy dad was my dad. But anyway, like, my dad, he said, like, son, you got to find the hardest working person in your whole job and work 10% harder than them.
Yeah.
And I was amazed he said only 10%. But his point was, you don't want to burn yourself out. Like, you want to find them, you want to work harder than them, but if you do 50%, then you're doing too much. If you do 90% or 100%, you're not doing enough. Do 110%. And I've lived by that since I met him at age 14. And now at 35, 21 years later, I'm still finding the hardest working person in that office. And in every single way. I mean, when it comes to how much I disclose, if I find somebody who discloses a whole lot, or somebody who don't disclose anything about how they feel, I try to pull back a little bit, because that's better, right, than the person who's already in that position. Or if I find somebody who's seeing this many patients, got this many no-shows, my job is to have 10%. My point is that, like, I gotta keep running. I gotta run a little bit faster. I ain't gotta be bulk fast, but I gotta be a little bit faster so I can stay ahead of crazy, man.
Yeah, man. Yeah, and what does that do to us? It puts us in a space where we don't recognize that we've been operating past burnout, and we've been and not only are you working harder. So imagine if it is based on the perception of what equitable hard work is. We're also doing it with a lens of having to make the people that we work with comfortable, leaving some of our identity at the door, and only picking that back up when you get home. I mean, we talked about it too in our previous kind of conversation that we've had, though. One thing that has really been, I have a friend, Chris Weaver. He did PhD in political science, UF, right? And he was saying that, he would teach, and sometimes in his clothes, and when I his our clothes, and he said, when I show up in my office hours, I'm in my gym apparel. This is how I work, but this is who I am. I'm still professional and whatnot. He said, and I was like, well, are you sure? And he made a point that stuck with me, and I immediately made changes that day. He said, if you truly said you hired me because of the diversity that I bring, and it makes your company better, it makes your school better, it makes your program better, then acknowledge and allow me to bring my diversity into this. And I was like, damn, that's good. And that's so real. And it made me take a step back and say, bro, have you been showing up as your authentic self in these classrooms? So we sneakerheads. Matter of fact, we even skipped that segment.
We did.
11s, and you pride.
Ice cold. The ice cold.
I'll show you yours in a second. I know. I wear my sneakers. I wear my sneakers to work. I wore my sneakers when I would teach leadership development in groups and teams, because I had to start bringing in more of me, because at the same time I realized that if people never see real images of us, if you never see me in a hoodie, if you never see me in a tank top, if you never see me, in a dashiki, but the only time you see those images is through conditioning on the media, where it's either in a mugshot or someone choked out, then equate it to fear. So I got to show up and say, I take up space, and this image of blackness is a doctor. Act accordingly. And if it's something you've never seen before, that's not my fault. But it's also a responsibility for us to start showing up more authentically, because that's one of the only ways we are going to be able, and we understand retaliation and pushback. So I say this from a space of where you're comfortable, where you feel safe. But just the idea that, we're just assimilating if we're not able to show up. And so for corporations who talk about diversity and inclusion, if you're not driving authentic inclusion, if you're not driving people to show up as themselves, to bring their religion, to bring the things that they care about, to bring their conversations and ills and concerns and hurt, if you're not allowing them to bring that in, it's affecting your bottom line. Because here's the thing, this whole week has been the least productive week for me. Now, from a D&I standpoint, most productive, because this is what I do. But from a standpoint of sitting, talking to employees, talking to family and friends, texting the group chat, trying to show up and still be present rather than take a mental health day, all of that could have actually driven bottom line results in something else. So to think that D&I is just something that's not an essential part of human resource or the culture within your company, you're losing if you're not allowing us to show up.
That's real. That's real, man. And I really, I couldn't have said it any better around, like, trying to show up for work, because that internal process I struggle with regularly. I'm going back to work soon, and I'm thinking about, like, one of my coworkers who's next door to me, Dr. Moxley. She does an amazing job. I mean, she's got African masks from all over the place. She's got books up about Black. I mean, she's got some of the most amazing. She's great at decorating, I think. But the point here is that, like, in addition to that, she shows up as a Black woman. She's the only Black practitioner, Black female practitioner that we have. I'm the only Black male practitioner that we have in our clinic currently. We've got some folks who do an amazing job, in our admin team. But as far as people who practice there, she's the only Black woman, I'm the only Black male. And it's amazing because I really admire the way that she shows up to work. I'm always trying to figure out, if I'm wearing a shirt and tie, or if I'm wearing a polo shirt, and some of that is loaded, right? It's like, am I gonna feel like myself? Because I need to be me as I'm doing therapy with my patients. I bought a bunch of bow ties, stopped wearing bow ties because it made me feel like I wasn't able to be as authentic in session as I could have been. Yeah. But to your point, part of who I am is my little Diani shirt. This is a Black-owned company that I got off of IG, so check them out. Really, really dope stuff. I gotta have my socks. As you see, the Cupid socks. I think we needed some love today, man. So, we did. I wanted to show something there with some love. And I had some coworkers back in the day when I was working in the VA in Florida, in Lake City, and they surprised me. My whole office was decorated with, like, socks and balloons. And everybody I pitched in and bought me 30, 40 pair of socks. So that was one of the pairs that I got from there. And for my 35th birthday, I went and picked up some light, nothing heavy, some light, little Air Max, little 97.
Oh, light.
Crazy.
Little
something light.
Something light, but okay, all right.
Oh, the 97. So I wanted a 97. These are some voltage Black ones. They're kind of crazy. But, a little purple in there. Just something to make me feel like, I wanted my first pair,
Man, they fired, man. Daddy,
I appreciate that.
I love it, man. I love it. You are an Air Max connoisseur. I'm seeing this.
I got a little.
This is like the second pair I've seen. That's all the Black History Month. That was just whew.
Yeah, and so I got a pair on the way. So I'm excited about them. It's my first Air Max 1. So
we got quarantine snacks during quarantine snacks.
My man. I know we're getting close to the hour, man, but I had something I really wanted to share, bro. It was this poem by Nikki Giovanni. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's called Allowables, right?
Nikki.
And I actually write, I'm a self-proclaimed poet. I've been writing it, since I was.
We'll get that book out this year.
Man, bro, I got a draft. So whatever,
I'm the book publishing guy. I'll get you to publish a book, man.
Hey, I'm ready. I'll send you my draft tonight. So, man, as a poet, man, I actually put together this piece following Ahmaud Arbery's murder. And, I sat down and I haven't written it, I just did it on a voice record. I sent it to a friend who's also a poet. He was like, he's a white male, but he's really blown away with, like, the message. So I'm hoping to get that out pretty soon. I don't care what to do with it, but just, like I talked about us doing this podcast, right? Stop hoarding this information and make sure that we share the gifts that we've been given with the world. So recently, so this coming Thursday, I'm going to be part of what they call a Sangha, which is like a practice, like a meditation practice with people of color. So I'm going to make sure to provide, the link and everything to you. I'll make sure to put it up on our social media as well if people want to join. It's open. It's an opportunity for folks to just connect, people of color to connect around some stuff that's been going on. And it's based out of here out of Nashville, but again, it's an open forum. So they were asking for resources for, what might be helpful. And this is one thing I ran across that I thought might be helpful. It really speaks to kind of, equality and kind of that threat of being a Black person. And as a Black man, I know you definitely feel it. So Nikki Giovanni said in her poem, Allowables, I killed a spider, not a murderous brown recluse, nor even a Black widow. And if the truth were told, this was only a small sort of papery spider. who should have run when I picked up the book, but she didn't. And she scared me, and I smashed her. And I don't think I'm allowed to kill something because I'm frightened.
Yeah, that, yeah, I think that kind of, yeah, goes back to being human, you know, just give us the empathy of a spider. You know what I'm saying? Give us this, yeah. Mm. Thank you, Sister Nate. uh, no, I hope the listeners receive something from that poem and sit on it and see what that means to them and think of, what are my next steps? Um, Black, white, brown, everybody. Um, Man, that sums it up, man. I don't think I'm supposed to kill something out of fear, and that fear is the unknown. Um, this is a part of helping ourselves and our non-people of color, our brothers and sisters, have more understanding and understand that the things and images that you see that you might be fearful of is from a lack of understanding and a lack of unheard hurt. Um, so I know we're running up out of time, bro, but I hope that people are encouraged to still have hope, still fight for justice, for dismantling of systemic oppression, and fight for allyship, fight for family, fight for friendship, and practice social distancing because COVID is still a thing.
Right. In the midst, we don't have time. We don't have time. We don't have time. I'm done. I'm done.
All right, we're done. All right, but shout out to HBCU Pride Nation. They made the sweatshirt, Travis. Shout out to the Black Onion. She told you she's an amazing artist. Shout out to North Carolina A&T. Shout out to Morehouse. Shout out to Florida. Like all of these spaces and places. Shout out to people who listened to this whole thing. Shout out to Black, Brown, White, Invisible, everybody, aliens, I don't know, but shout out to all of y'all. We love you. We hope you love each other. And that as we process through this trying time, we understand that we all have universal human rights. And all we want to be is heard. We want you to hear us with empathy. And we just want life. We want the ability to live life and to give that to others. And I think if we can get back to that, it's gonna take some work, it's gonna take some time, but we won't give up.
Yeah, you got that right. Your name one more time, sir, so the folks know.
Dr. Jared Jones. You can find me on Instagram, Twitter, all those as @ILiveMighty. Website coming soon. How about yourself, sir?
Hey, man. Well, my name is Dr. Dennis McLeod. I go by Dr. Socks. You can find me as dr.sockology. That is SOCKOLOGY. You can find me on IG, Facebook, Twitter, under those names. Hey, I had a good time having some snacks, man. I think it's about time to stop eating snacks and go get some food.
Yes, sir, brother. This did me a world of good, man. I appreciate you. Appreciate y'all, man. In honor of your shirt, Wakanda Forever.
All right, brother.
All right, brother. Peace.
Peace.